Well, welcome and thank y'all for coming out tonight. This was a quick turn. We've already done a program in March, and we were just manna from heaven. We were lucky that we had another opportunity. We didn't want to miss it. Very happy to have y'all here. Wanted to let me coming attractions, April 14th, not an auspicious day in history, particularly. The Titanic, that was April 14th. Abraham Lincoln's assassination, April 14th. But we hope it'll be more auspicious, and we're going to have our regional reports from our regional security studies. And included in that will be also Dr. Josh Goodman, who is our Iran expert at AU. So we'll be engaging on the Iranian war with Dr. Goodman as well. So really a great program, April 14th again for that. Well, we're very pleased tonight to have, well, first, let me preface it this way. I've been really lucky. I've gotten to work with the State Department several times, both overseas, working together in different theaters, but also I was the senior military official at the State Department in one of my last assignments. Had a fantastic time there, worked closely, and gained even more respect for our diplomatic corps and the people who do great work around the world with just a fraction of the resources that we had at the Department of Defense. I was always a little, whenever we're here, we're going to cut the State Department again. I kind of wince because we don't need to do that. You know, they punch way above their weight. They add a lot more and it's a great investment. So I'm very happy that tonight we have a State Department professional here with us who's going to give us a perspective on really the role of diplomats from the founding of our country. So here we are at the 250th anniversary, and we're going to have, it's good to have a perspective on what the people who have been our diplomats and the kind of things they've helped us achieve. And to do that, we have Tom Selinger, a retired Foreign Service officer, and he's going to give us this historical perspective on diplomats and their role from Benjamin Franklin forward, and share accounts of how our modern diplomats have saved American citizens in peril, opened markets for products from our farms and factories, and built alliances to ensure our collective security and, very importantly, advance our ideals. He'll also highlight specifically diplomats from Alabama and how their work has benefited communities across the state. Tom's well equipped to do this. He served 27 years in the U.S. Foreign Service, overseas tours in Kyrgyzstan, Denmark, Croatia, Albania, Trinidad and Tobago, Tobago, yes, sorry, and portfolios ranging from security cooperation to American citizen services. Now, in his retirement, which doesn't seem to really be a retirement, he works for the Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training, which is a nonprofit where he directs outreach efforts to promote public understanding of the work of America's diplomats. Tom and I, although we did not know each other, were both in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I was with the French. He was with the 101st Air Assault Division. He also worked as a locally employed political specialist for the Canadian government at their consulate in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's a graduate of Drake University, and he's married to a fellow diplomat. That's interesting. Is everything a negotiation?
We'll get to it.
And they have 4 children and 3 grandchildren. We're very happy to welcome Tom Selinger.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's so great to be here with you in Montgomery. Am I saying that right? Montgomery. Thank you for this warm welcome. It's really a pleasure, and what a beautiful place. This is my first time in the city, and it is so beautiful. So, could I have the second slide? So this is my roadmap for tonight. I'm going to start by just adding a couple of details to what Waldo said about my career. Then I'm going to give you just a quick overview of this Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training and what it's all about. Then I'm going to share how American diplomats played a critical role in gaining American independence. And then we're going to look at how diplomats connected to Alabama have actually made our country safer, stronger, and more prosperous over the past century. Sound okay? Yeah. All right, next slide, please. So Waldo mentioned my wife, Kirsten. She likes to say to me, we don't have much time, so let's talk about me. And she, by the way, actually is on her way back from Kyiv. She was just in Ukraine because she coordinates US government assistance to Europe. And she was specifically in Kyiv to coordinate with the Europeans and with the Ukrainian officials on that humanitarian assistance that the US government is providing to the Ukrainian people. Also in Kyiv, she apparently slept in the bathtub of her hotel room because that's the safest place to be during the nighttime missile strikes and drone attacks. But she's safe. I'm glad to say she's on a plane back home today. I'm incredibly proud of the work that she's still doing in the Foreign Service. But let's talk about me. Actually, Waldo really mentioned all the critical parts of my career. You can see it all up there. But if I'm going to be talking about Alabama diplomats, I thought I better establish my own Alabama credentials. So down in the lower right, I'm not from around here. You might have figured that out already. But my two furry best friends are Forrest and Bear. Were born somewhere between Birmingham and Huntsville. They landed at our house about 18 months ago, and y'all make good dogs. So they are great. They are great, great buddies. So, and for my friends, the lawyers in the crowd, I should add my disclaimer. I am here representing the Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training. I do not speak for the State Department, despite my years of service. But I'm also here as someone, as you can see, has spent my entire adult life as a public servant of one stripe or another. At this incredible inflection point for our country, when Americans are deciding, what do we want our government to do? What do we want to keep? And what do we want to cut from our government services? So in that context, those political debates will continue. But in that context, I really feel privileged to be here to share with you what diplomats connected to Alabama have been doing on your behalf out there. So next slide, please. What is this association? So the Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training was founded about 40 years ago, and it is dedicated to, it's a nonpartisan, non-profit, very much nonprofit, nonpartisan educational organization dedicated to recording and sharing the experiences of America's diplomats, and we do that through oral histories. So we have an incredible online collection of about 3,000 oral histories. It's the largest diplomatic oral history collection in the world, and it covers 100 years of diplomacy. They started interviewing people in the 80s. They looked for the oldest diplomats they could find before they passed away. And so some of the people in our collection started their careers in 1917, and we've got stories about all kinds of amazing stuff. And we use that. It's a first person resource or a primary source for historians, for journalists, for educators, for fellow diplomats as well, because we have people at our National Foreign Affairs Training Center where our offices actually are. They use these oral histories to help inform themselves if they're getting ready to go out on a foreign posting. So it's a really incredible resource. I use these stories in my public outreach efforts because I think it's a way to humanize the diplomatic experience. And that is all made, and it's all about trying to build public understanding of diplomacy. This is all made possible by the generosity of the Una Chapman Cox Foundation. There, I can tell you a story about her in the Q&A session if you're interested. And then in the upper right, you'll see we also publish books. And upper right is our most recent publication. That is a a centennial anthology of 100 years of kind of the best excerpts from our collection, the most significant little passages. And it covers all the regions of the world and all the kind of specialties within the Foreign Service. So it's a great thing. It's not available in bookstores, but it is on Amazon if anyone's interested, if you like what you hear tonight. All right, so where did this all begin? Next slide, please. Let's get to the origin story of American diplomacy. Our collection, as I mentioned, goes back 100 years. But if we go back 250 years to 1776, we have the 13 American colonies have just declared independence. George Washington and his army are completely outgunned by the Redcoats. And we have a Continental Congress desperate to bring in outside help because we don't stand a chance without some help. So Continental Congress's Committee of Secret Correspondence dispatches Benjamin Franklin as our first American diplomat. He's going to Paris, and his task is to secure much needed military aid from the kings of France and Spain. Now, this is just weeks after Benjamin Franklin has signed the Declaration of Independence. And he sets sail for France, not only as a 70-year-old man, who risks pirates and scurvy and all the other things that went with traveling to Europe at that time. He also goes as a traitor to the British crown. So if that ship gets intercepted, Benjamin Franklin's in trouble. Thankfully, he makes it to France, and he has the Declaration of Independence with him. And the word has started to spread around Europe. And we remember the Declaration of Independence as a message to King George III in England, that we're done with you. But in Franklin's hands, that message, that document is just as much a message to Louis XVI in Paris and Carlos III in Madrid. They're both monarchs who lost territory to the British in the 7 Years' War. But they're also monarchs who were hesitant to meddle in the colonies of another monarchy, because if you do that, they're going to meddle, some monarchy is going to meddle in your colonies. So they have sort of a mutual standoff relationship. But this Declaration of Independence, and they're not sure they really want to do anything for a rebellion that they don't know is serious. At this point, we're not winning any battles. But this Declaration of Independence tells those two kings, we aren't part of anybody's kingdom anymore. We're an independent nation that, like France and Spain, have a problem with the British. And if we fight together, we can defeat this common enemy. So Franklin's genius is in appealing to the two kings' own interests while understanding their limitations. Both of these, they desperately want to see the British Empire weakened. It's been their nemesis for generations. But neither one is ready to return to open warfare, especially for a ragtag outfit like George Washington's army. So Franklin begins to embellish George Washington's situation. His troops of 18,000 suddenly become 80,000 in Franklin's conversations. And at the same time, he's simultaneously facilitating covert shipments of cannons, muskets, bayonets, gunpowder, uniforms, blankets, all through French and Spanish shell companies, front companies that have been created just to do this. And all financed by those two royal courts. It takes about a year, but this assistance finally begins to turn the tide. And when the Continental Army defeats the British at the Battle of Saratoga, 1777, that's the moment to strike. And Franklin goes to the French. Now they'll take us seriously. And the French do. And they agree to sign a military alliance with Benjamin Franklin and to recognize the United States as an independent nation and contribute troops and ships to the fight. In 1779, the Spanish follow suit and openly join our revolution. And by 1781, the Spanish siege of Pensacola, not so far from here, and the French assistance at the Battle of Yorktown make the difference that seals our victory over the British. Historians think that the assistance that Franklin obtained in men and materials over his almost 10 years in Paris would be valued in the billions of dollars. So after signing the peace treaty with the British, he puts his name on that as well. Benjamin Franklin returns to Philadelphia just in time to attend the Constitutional Convention of 1787, and he puts his signature on that foundational document as well. So he's got the trifecta, I think, or the quadrifecta of all those important documents. So under this new Constitution, Thomas Jefferson becomes our first Secretary of State. And he establishes a structure for American diplomacy that is in keeping with George Washington's vision of the world, which is we want to have commerce with other countries. We want to make money with other countries. We want trade. We do not want any entangling alliances, because he had watched Europe, descending into conflict due to all these entangling alliances. So that's what he creates. That means Jefferson's diplomatic structure is very tiny, very underfunded. It doesn't really have any funding. And the diplomats are all appointed based on political loyalties. And they focus mostly on commercial affairs because of that, George Washington's view. And in that era, that revolves around ships and sailors mostly. So they did a lot of that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. So Thomas Jefferson's system for American diplomacy works or stays intact for about 150 years. But when the 1920s come around, the world begins to change. This is right after World War I, of course, and we emerge from that war as really the greatest economic power and military power in the world. So that situation, along with a global pandemic, and the need to control immigration. There was a mood, a very anti-immigrant mood at the time, very isolationist, because the influenza pandemic was coming into the United States via soldiers actually returning from World War I, and so the fear of immigrants grows. The political rhetoric around that becomes quite toxic about immigration, and so the United States decides, if you're going to enter our country, you need a passport with a visa approved by an American embassy if you're going to enter our country. That's the first time they require that. And suddenly we need diplomats out in the field to handle all this immigration control, the interviewing and deciding who meets US visa law and can come into our country. So the isolationist rhetoric at the time might have been pointing to a full retreat from the world. But the reality in the 1920s was that the world's coming to us, whether we like it or not. So Congress decides that we're going to create a professional career foreign service to deal with the world on our own terms. Next slide, please. So what changed? In 1924, Congress passes legislation to create a new career foreign service. It's a professional, nonpartisan career track based on competitive examination and merit promotion. For the first time, the State Department can recruit and train diplomats. They can move them around to different postings. Before, they would just stay in one place. And they created a system for salaries, for promotions, and thankfully for retirement. And while there are still politically appointed diplomats at the top of the State Department and at the top of many embassies, but this career, what we call non-career diplomats, the members of this new career foreign service are no longer hired or assigned based on their political loyalties. They are duty-bound to inform, advise, and implement the foreign policy of whomever the American people elect to occupy the White House. And over the years, these provisions apply to staff who deploy overseas from the State Department, the Departments of Commerce and Agriculture, who also have their foreign service tracks. And when they existed, the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. Information Agency. And then hopefully now you're wondering, what did this carefully selected nonpartisan career foreign service cadre do over the next 100 years? Because that's where we go next, thanks to ADST's amazing oral history collection. So next slide, please. Welcome to what I call the century of service. But first, I have to add a small footnote. American diplomacy has a little bit of a, what you might call a constituency problem, I guess. The American public does not generally see itself as benefiting from the work of our diplomats scattered across the world. But whether Americans know it or not, they depend on us for a lot of things. And in order to help my fellow countrymen understand the amazing breadth of diplomacy, I've grouped these stories under themes of who or what benefits from our work. And it starts with American citizens overseas. It's also beneficial to our businesses and our workers, America's farmers, and our collective security and America's ideals. What I like to think about is America's place in the world. So next slide, please. So let's start with American citizens, because that's the first priority of all of our diplomatic missions as citizens, taking care of our American citizens. So this work can range from the routine lost passport or a minor arrest to dramatic evacuations and even hostage situations. So that also includes being America's frontline negotiator when Americans are detained or arrested overseas. So first, the Alabama diplomat, William J. Dias. That's him in the lower left. He was born just down the road in Troy and graduated from the University of Alabama. And he joined the Foreign Service in 1958. And a decade later, he's assigned to Berlin when that city is still divided between the communists and the Western powers. And he is at our embassy in West Berlin. He is the guy who's the chief liaison to the Soviets, the Soviet embassy over in East Berlin. So if someone gets arrested by the East German police, William Dias is the guy you call to try to get them some help. So in one memorable case, an American Army lieutenant is arrested for smuggling people from the East back to the West. One unfortunate night, he has two people in his trunk of his car as he's trying to cross back to West Berlin. Unfortunately, one of those was East German informant and turns in the young lieutenant, and he is arrested by the East German police. So William Dias starts to look into this case. It turns out this young lieutenant is quite guilty of running a lucrative side hustle of regularly and illegally transporting people from the East over to the West. But Dias is not going to let him rot in an East German jail. So he marches over to that Soviet embassy and he demands that the Soviets release this young lieutenant back to the Americans. And they try to put him off and say, no, that's the East German problem. Don't talk to us about that. But Dias knows this is the Soviets really run this place, and you've got to give him back to us. And our U.S. military criminal justice system can take care of his prosecution. Soviets push him off again. William Dias goes back to that Soviet embassy 14 times over the course of 2 days and keeps insisting, you're going to give me this lieutenant. Finally, he thinks they just got tired of him and they gave him back the lieutenant just to make him go away. But the Soviets finally agree, okay, we'll pick him up from the East German prison and meet us at Checkpoint Charlie in the dead of night, just how they do these exchanges. And he recovers this young lieutenant, saving him, no doubt, from unspoken mistreatment by the communist authorities. And Dias does this repeatedly over the course of his years in Berlin, undoubtedly saving dozens of sons and daughters from mistreatment in communist prisons. He goes on to become our ambassador to the Netherlands. So very successful guy. Okay, Star He is up in the upper right corner. She gets to see large-scale evacuations of American citizens very much up close. She grows up actually in Little Rock, Arkansas, but she's a graduate of Troy University, so we'll make her an honorary Alabamian, I think, for these purposes. She graduated from West Point as well, and she's in the U.S. Army's military police, and then goes to Troy and gets a master's degree actually, and um, and she then joins. At some point, she transitions and joins the State Department, actually in 2009, and becomes a diplomatic security service special agent. In 2021, she arrives in Kabul. She's sent there to investigate passport and visa fraud at the embassy in Kabul, but she's quickly swept into the evacuation of American and allied personnel from Afghanistan as the Taliban start to regain control. She and her fellow diplomatic security agents safely evacuate more than 1,400 U.S. government personnel connected to the embassy, and their family members and contractors and foreign allies. And after all of our personnel are evacuated, Starr goes back to destroying classified documents at the embassy because we can't let this fall into Taliban hands, and sensitive equipment. And she's removing weapons from the embassy, getting them over to the airport to be evacuated. Then she joins round-the-clock efforts to evacuate tens of thousands of at-risk Afghans. That's her on the right side, and then below that is her checking the documents of the at-risk Afghans as they come through through the airport. As things begin to unravel near the end of the evacuation, she joins the efforts to keep the airport secure until they can get all the people out, amid flash grenades, tear gas, machine gun fire. And she is there out on one of the very last planes to leave Afghanistan. And for her bravery, she receives Women in Federal Law Enforcement's Julie Y. Cross Award for bravery, the organization's highest honor. Next slide, please. Let's talk about American prosperity. American diplomats contribute to American prosperity and help preserve American jobs by opening opportunities for American business and ensuring a level playing field overseas. So sometimes this is simply defending the American economy from outside threats. Andrew Kilgore is born and raised on a farm in West Alabama near Greensboro. And after serving in the Pacific in World War II, he begins his foreign service career in 1949. Kilgore becomes our ambassador to Qatar in 1977 in the midst of the 1970s oil shock, which we can all relate to today. And the American economy has been hit hard by the rising prices. The Iran hostage crisis adds to problems in the oil industry. And the White House asks Ambassador Kilgore, could you convince Qatar not to vote to increase the price of oil at the next meeting of OPEC? So Kilgore appeals to the emir, who's there. So Kilgore is in the lower left and the emir is next to him. He knows that Qatar wants a solution to tensions in the Middle East at that time because the tensions were rising high. And he also knows that the emir is ashamed of, as a Muslim, for what Iran has done to American diplomats in Tehran. So Washington had provided Kilgore with all kinds of economic talking points about oil supply and oil demand, but he puts that all aside, and instead he appeals to what's important to the emir. Please don't raise the price of oil, he tells the emir. I'm speaking for President Carter. It's a personal request from him. And Kilgore explains that Carter is a man of his word and intends to work toward Middle East peace, which we know he does. But he needs this one thing from you, Emir. And the Emir responds simply, you can count on me. I want to help President Carter. I don't care what the rest of OPEC does. I'm not going to raise the price of oil. I'm not going to raise prices, and you can tell the president that. And he does not raise prices. And Kilgore goes on to help American energy companies become involved in the exploration and production in Qatar's giant offshore natural gas fields. And his dedication helps control the price of gasoline for American consumers and the success of American energy companies. And of course, the big business deals always get high level attention. So when Donald Gregg is ambassador in South Korea, he's a former CIA officer actually, and grew up in New York, but he's in South Korea in the early 90s, and the South Koreans are looking to buy an aircraft. You might recognize that one, Waldo. It's a P-3 Orion Lockheed anti-submarine or submarine hunter aircraft. They're looking to buy new anti-submarine aircraft, and he's trying to encourage them to do that. He's meeting with the Minister of Defense, and he can't understand why the Minister of Defense doesn't seem interested in the low price that he just told him that Lockheed is planning to offer, that he knows is lower than the French prices. The main competitor is a French aircraft. But the minister doesn't seem interested at all in what he's saying. So fortunately, he's accompanied by a Foreign Service officer named Dick Christensen. He grew up in Wisconsin, and he's serving as the counselor for political and military affairs at the embassy. But he's also fluent in Korean. And he passes a note to Ambassador Gregg. He says, the interpreter isn't saying what you're saying. He's not interpreting your words. So the message isn't getting through. So Ambassador Gregg says, okay. He politely ends the meeting. He says, thank you for your time, Mr. Minister. Can I come back and see you just one more time before you sign the papers with the French? The minister agrees to that. The next day, Gregg comes back with his own interpreter, and this time the message gets through. And the minister says, what? I didn't know this. Cancel that French contract, and Lockheed gets the sale. Now, what ties this to this region is that airplane is assembled in Marietta, Georgia. And this sale that Donald Gregg made helped keep that factory, that assembly plant, open for 2 more years. So that's 2 more years of jobs for that region. And some months later, Gregg goes to Marietta, Georgia, actually to visit the factory. He is welcomed as a hero by the Lockheed employees, but the French never invited him to anything ever again. Next slide, please. Agriculture, America's farmers. This is a particularly important area where diplomats ensure American prosperity. Our diplomats support our farmers by promoting agricultural exports, understanding and opening markets, and protecting U.S. crops from invasive species. Excuse me. So James O'Brien Howard is one of the pioneers in this work. He's born in Selma and raised on an Alabama farm growing cotton, soybeans, and raising cattle. He works his way through college at Birmingham Southern, and then starts with the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 1939, and he becomes one of the very first agricultural attaches in this new Foreign Agricultural Service in the 1950s. And he quickly rises to become the deputy director of the Cotton Division in 1953, where he serves on delegations to explore new markets for American cotton and negotiates with other producers of cotton on something called the International Cotton Advisory Committee, kind of an OPEC, I guess, for cotton at the time, to encourage them not to overproduce and drive down prices. In his first year with the Cotton Division, U.S. raw cotton exports increased by 50%. He then goes on to serve as agricultural attaché in Egypt, one of America's biggest competitors in cotton production. And anti-Western attitudes are running hot at that time. This is, they weren't too fond of us at the time. So the Egyptian government won't share any data with him about Egyptian production. They won't let him visit any of the sites. So he cleverly hires the son of Egypt's deputy agricultural minister as his assistant in his office. And that suddenly gives him access to key cotton production sites and to all kinds of data that he wouldn't otherwise be able to see. And thanks to his clever dedication, he keeps American cotton competitive on the global market in the face of dramatic increases actually in Egyptian production. And that's good news for Alabama's farmers. Lewis G. Davis is another, he's born and raised in Birmingham. He carries this legacy forward. He becomes Deputy Assistant Administrator of the Foreign Agricultural Service in 1969, and eventually oversees the process of making Foreign Agricultural Service officers members of this career foreign service so they can receive better support at embassies overseas. They can be more effective partners and as they promote American ag exports and protect our farms from invasive pests. Next slide, please. Okay, perhaps the most overlooked contribution of American diplomats is their support to our nation's security. Diplomats serve on the front lines of regulating legal immigration into the United States. I mentioned that earlier, but they also provide reporting that warns of conflict. They engage in negotiations and dialogue to avoid conflict. And when that fails, they build the coalitions to join us in conflict. And when the fighting's over, they assist nations in recovering from conflict. Across his career, Samuel D. Boykin finds himself in a number of roles that build America's security. I could not find a picture of Samuel, but he was born and raised here in Montgomery and attends the University of Alabama before he enters international affairs during World War II as part of the Lend-Lease program, our way of assisting our allies in World War II before we were actually openly in the war, in the fight against fascism. So he's actually the guy who places Lend-Lease representatives around the world to try to advance that program with our allies. So this leads Boykin eventually to a position in the State Department where he helps organize the establishment of the United Nations, actually. And he becomes the deputy to the first U.S. ambassador to the UN, all part of a global effort to end war. He then goes on to head the Office of Consular Affairs in the 1950s. They're tasked with enforcing visa laws that specifically want to keep communists out of the United States. And he has his hands full because this is right when Senator McCarthy begins his effort to root communists out of the U.S. government. And part of Boykin's job is to check on the loyalties of the employees inside the State Department. So that is another long story that he has to tell. But if this was not enough, he leaves that office and goes to a role in creating a contingency location for the U.S. government, for U.S. government leaders in the event of a nuclear attack. So he helps establish the Mount Weather Alternate Operations Center in the Blue Ridge Mountains outside of Washington, D.C. So William Tapley Bennett, we do have a photo of William Tapley Bennett. He's up in the upper right. He's the taller one in that photo. He finds himself also in the middle of American security issues throughout his long career. He grows up on a farm just across the line in Griffin, Georgia. But he also serves as the State Department faculty member at the Air University at Maxwell Air Force Base for a couple of years. So we'll give him honorary Alabamian status for the day as well. He started with the State Department in 1941, and his first assignment is to the Dominican Republic during the war. And 2 decades later, he returns as the U.S. ambassador. He starts as a junior guy there and comes back as the U.S. ambassador to the Dominican Republic. Following a coup d'etat that kind of sets the stage for a bloody civil war in the Dominican Republic. Bennett oversees a massive evacuation process led by U.S. Marines to bring more than 4,500 people to safety as Santo Domingo kind of descends into fighting. He evacuates American citizens, allies from other countries, and we know from today's news that unstable authoritarian states in our neighborhood are not in America's interests. So Bennett and his team work with the international community to try to find a political solution to this crisis. But he recommends that U.S. troops stay to stabilize the island. It's a controversial decision at the time, but he says we need to stabilize the situation so we can implement this political solution. You'll see American soldiers under fire on the streets of Santo Domingo there, up in the photo next to him. So he faces criticism for this decision, but the U.S. government, the White House, backs him up and keeps troops there to stabilize the island. And the Dominican Republic, thanks to Bennett's efforts, proceeds to free and orderly elections and we get the troops out ahead of schedule, ahead of what we thought we had to do. And he remembers it as a case of trying to help a neighbor who'd fallen off the road of democracy back onto the road. And it worked. Dominican Republic has had the longest period of political stability in the country's history. So that was a success story. He goes on to lead our delegation at the United Nations for a while, and then in 1977, he becomes our U.S. ambassador to NATO, where he leads negotiations to place U.S. Pershing missiles around in different spots in Europe to counterbalance the SS-20 missiles the Soviets have already put around Warsaw Pact countries. This move proves key a few years later when the US begins negotiations with the Soviets for the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF. That strategic balance that Bennett helped create gives us the leverage actually to negotiate the elimination of these weapons a decade later and made our world a safer place. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, lastly, the work of diplomats is often about maintaining American influence, setting global standards, and living up to our ideals, even in dangerous places. This is admittedly the area where diplomacy has had the most growing pains over the last year. But what is definitely still included is telling the American story and building understanding of what America represents. So Margaret Tutwiler, one of the great daughters of Birmingham, she enters the foreign affairs community through politics. When Secretary of State James Baker, her colleague on electoral campaigns, convinces her to take on the role of State Department spokesperson. She explains U.S. foreign policy, both to American and international media, unlike anyone else could, during such monumental times as the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the Persian Gulf War. Tutwiler goes on to serve as a U.S. ambassador to Morocco. She arrives just a month before al-Qaeda terrorists crash airplanes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in 2001. So suddenly America is at war. But Tutwiler wants to make clear that we're not at war with the entire Muslim world. She quickly understands that the majority of Moroccans know very little about the United States, and most have never met an American. She remembers the prime minister, those are the two of them together down in the lower right, the prime minister telling her that he remembers people in Morocco on the streets waving American flags after the defeat of the Nazis. But he tells her, today, my people don't understand. They don't know what American values are. So Ambassador Tutwiler makes it her mission to tell the American story. She starts doing media interviews. She creates a program where people of all levels at the embassy go out into neighborhoods and villages just to talk about their home state and the American values that they grow up with. So suddenly you have American diplomats in all these classrooms. She brings in shipments of books with photos, coffee table books, photos of everyday life in America, and she begins handing those out to Moroccan people. She gets posters from every governor in the United States of their state, has them framed, and she hangs them on the wall of the embassy so both visitors and staff alike can appreciate the richness of our country. She also takes on U.S. development programs, development assistance programs, saying every bit of our assistance is going to be labeled with the message that this is provided in friendship with the American people. It appears on everything from fruit trees to wheelchairs. But her staff tell her as they travel around the country, they see those labels taken off that assistance and put on the walls of people's house inside in these remote villages across Morocco. Her effort creates a better understanding of who the American people are, our goals and our values. Tutwiler says it best herself, saying, if Americans show up in this neighborhood, the community's going to hear about it. The grandparents are going to hear about it. The friends are going to hear about it. People are going to talk about it. They might not agree with anything we say, but they're at least going to know that the Americans showed up. Condoleezza Rice, another daughter of Birmingham, another Birmingham great, she championed a similar style of engagement when she became Secretary of State in 2005. She called it transformational diplomacy. American values, she said, are universal. An international order that reflects our values is the best guarantee of our enduring national interest. And then Robert E. Gribben, he's in the left side here. He has one of the more unusual stories to tell. He essentially grows up on the campus of the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. His dad is an Episcopal minister in the campus ministries. And so, you know him, okay. And he, after serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, Gribben joins the Foreign Service in 1973 and rises quickly, becoming the deputy chief of mission, the number 2 in the embassy in Rwanda in 1979. And the National Geographic Society comes to talk to him. Actually, before he even gets to post, they meet with him in Washington. And they want to talk to him about a woman doing mountain gorilla research in Rwanda by the name of Diane Fossey. Now, Fossey was a notoriously difficult person to get along with if you were not a mountain gorilla. But she had also developed emphysema because she smoked packs and packs of cigarettes. And her incredible 10 years of research had not yet been documented. So the National Geographic Society, her sponsor, was a little bit worried they were going to lose all this research if she keeled over. And that's Gribben. Yeah, and there's Diane with a couple of her gorilla friends. So National Geographic Society asks, could you, Mr. Gribben, convince her to come home for a bit so she can recover her health and publish her research? The world really needs this documented. And of course, Fossey would have nothing of it. She saw herself as the defender of these gorillas, and she was constantly fighting off poachers and people she saw as trying to undermine her research. She couldn't possibly leave. But her aggressive tactics with poachers, which included, in one case, kidnapping the children of a poacher as leverage to convince him to stop hunting gorillas, that got her in a little hot water with the Rwandan authorities. So Gribben is finally able to convince her, if you don't leave voluntarily, the Rwandans are going to throw you out and you won't ever be able to come back. So she finally gives into that. She goes home. She goes to Cornell University, where she writes her astounding book, Gorillas in the Mist, opening the world's eyes to these amazing creatures and bringing international attention to the need to protect them. This helped launch the conservation education movement that helped locals understand, villagers understand that the value of the natural wonders around them. U.S. programs began to help villagers find ways to monetize that resource so they would see wildlife around them as a resource, rather an asset rather than a trophy. And for his part, Gribben goes on to become U.S. ambassador to the Central African Republic and then returns to Rwanda as our ambassador in the wake of the Rwandan genocide. Okay, one more slide. Okay, sometimes diplomats have to accept the risk that they will be attacked for representing America as the easiest target for those who want to do us harm. Dolph B. Owens grew up in Tuscaloosa. That's his memorial in the lower left. He served as a captain in the U.S. Army, U.S. Army Special Forces, and then went to Vietnam as a civilian security advisor, public safety advisor with the International Cooperation Administration, which would soon become USAID after that. On November 5th, 1960, Owens and his Vietnamese driver were returning from a mission to advise guards in a coastal village southeast of Saigon, and they were killed by machine gun fire in a Viet Cong ambush. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I'll just say that diplomacy is a career like no other. The duties of a diplomat are diverse, as you can see, and the dangers can be real, but it's an amazing career. And ADST is really proud to be the repository of this extraordinary service of our American diplomats. So I really appreciate your attention, and I welcome questions and comments. Waldo. Thank you.
Questions from the audience?
this is probably a little bit almost too personal, but 3 of my grandparents came to the United States through Ellis Island between 1895 and 1902. So, and I mean, I've been to Ellis Island and gotten the tour about how people were processed and stuff. So this was pre-visa?
Yes.
Just show up?
They just showed up. It was actually, I think, the Department of Labor that staffed Ellis Island, and they would meet, whatever papers the immigrant had, they would look at, and then they would make up probably a new last name that they could pronounce and send them on their way. And, they would either head to be a farmer in North Dakota or work in a factory somewhere in New York. So yes, it was Department of Labor, actually.
One of my grandmother's first name was, the spelling was changed.
Really? Yes. Yeah, I'm not
Thank you.
not uncommon. Yes, sir.
Another question? I wanted to make one note. Bob Gribbon was a graduate of Swanee, which is one of the things I have with him. And then I was very fortunate. His father was a great man, right?
Okay.
Had a chance when I was going to Camp McDowell, I first met him. So
Okay.
great family. Let me ask a question, President's prerogative.
Yes.
We seem to be experiencing a lot. Well, I'll back up. The telephone sort of revolutionized diplomacy in a way with this idea of direct communication. You didn't have to do all that. Now we're seeing another revolution, which is diplomacy without diplomats, it seems.
Yes.
So, I guess just talk a little bit about that and what, especially in negotiations, which you mentioned, what our State Department diplomats bring to the table.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, and communications, when in Ben Franklin's day, it was months between when he could get word back to the Continental Congress, if it got there at all. And often it was intercepted by the British, and months before he would get any new instructions. So, but today, yes, the rate of communications is astounding. I think what the diplomats today bring to the table, and we'd like to see more of them at the table, I think, the career diplomats, they bring that deep understanding, that deep expertise of what the other side is after. I think it's really that understanding, because ultimately the negotiation is about finding common ground that everybody can agree to. And it's those diplomats who talk to local people, talk to local opinion leaders, academics. I mean, not just government officials, but also just kind of the society as a whole. And they bring a deep understanding of that. And then also negotiation skills too, because it's an art for sure. And the understanding kind of how you approach an issue and how you find that common ground is something that I think professional diplomats can really contribute to. I think that's maybe where I'll leave it, if that's okay. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your really interesting presentation. And given your very recent retirement,
Yes, ma'am.
I presume that you are still in touch with many of your friends still serving.
Yes, including my wife. Yes, exactly. Yes.
And I am just very curious, that major sub-factor of your organization, which is explaining and promoting American ideals. How's that going right now overseas? Since we don't even know what they are right now.
That we reflect as foreign service, the career foreign service, we reflect the foreign policy of the White House, as I said. So they are quite careful to communicate messages that are acceptable to the White House. I would say we've seen great changes in that in recent years, and I'm going to remain nonpartisan as I can in this discussion. I think we've seen our alliances tested by some of the rhetoric. So I think diplomats in Denmark right now have who have followed in my footsteps, have a particular task, I think, to explain what's happening in Washington and what we want from Denmark. And maybe I shouldn't. And I worked a lot on Greenland when I was there too, and now it's very much in the news. And maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Hi, Michelle.
I have to ask, what was your favorite posting?
Oh my
and why?
gosh. Oh
And
my
I know,
gosh.
you know, I have a favorite, so.
Yeah. Gosh. For us, I think Croatia might have been the most wonderful time. We were both of our children were born while we were there. Our two younger children were born while we were there. But also it was an incredible place to work. It's incredibly beautiful, and the people are also, I mean, people everywhere are fantastic, but they're particularly interesting people. And we were there, it was almost 10 years since the war in the Balkans, but yet we still had problems related to the war. They still had refugee issues. They still had landmines that we were working to remove. They had these crazy stockpiles of weapons that we were trying to get rid of. They still had war crimes investigations going on. We were helping them to manage the war crimes trial process so that traumatized victims wouldn't be repeatedly re-traumatized. And so that was fascinating work from my standpoint. We were working on reconciliation issues, trying to get kids from different ethnic communities to go to summer camp together just so they could see each other as humans, so that these animosities from the war wouldn't continue. So that was a really fascinating place to work and a wonderful time for our family. So I will say Croatia.
I wonder, could you give us an idea of what political ambassadors bring positively to the table?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Versus what career
Career ambassadors.
ambassadors
Yes, sir.
present pro and con.
Okay, very good. Yes, I've worked for both, and both are fantastic. So when you have a career ambassador, you have that, career experience, a long background. Oftentimes that Dominican Republic story where he started there as a junior officer and came back as a career ambassador is not that unusual. We had that in Croatia, actually, when I was there, a guy who had served his first tour there and then came back. So they bring that deep expertise and also understanding of how the foreign service works and how to run an embassy, I guess, because it is a particular kind of organization. But if you have a politically appointed ambassador, you have connections that a career ambassador does not have. So you have an ambassador who can potentially call the White House, if not the president, and get what the embassy thinks they want, or to sway a policy decision that might you see locally a little different, and you think we should really move in this direction. So they bring these incredible connections. They also bring the appeal for the host government, that I can talk to somebody, this person is a friend of the president, and if I say something to them, I know the president's going to hear it, I guess. So it's that kind of an attraction. So you get a different kind of dynamic, I think, with the host government. You also sometimes have personal resources that career diplomats don't have that can add to the embassy's ability to do certain things, like entertain or the 4th of July celebration. A political ambassador can bring in a pretty amazing 4th of July party that a career ambassador might not be able to. It depends on the person and their ambitions.
Approximately what the breakdown is right now?
Yeah.
Versus
It has been typical is maybe 30% political, and that primarily is in Europe and Caribbean and some of the bigger, more important countries like Japan and China. I think that percentage is higher now. I know there are a lot of embassies running right now without ambassadors. There was a big recall, I think it was in the newspapers, a recall of career ambassadors from about 30 countries, I think in January, was it? And so that core right now is actually less than it was before. So I'm not sure exactly what today's breakdown is, but certainly this administration tends to have more politically appointed ambassadors than previous administrations. I don't think it's unprecedented, but definitely on that side.
Well, let me close with the last question.
Sure.
One thing that at the beginning we never heard addressed, and there was an ID card for
Oh,
a
yes.
Rotary exchange
yes.
student. Can you tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about
if
your
you-
first foray?
If
into
you can,
diplomacy?
yeah, if you can flip back to the first slide, people can see it. But yes, so I got my start in international affairs, I guess, as a Rotary exchange student out of high school. First, my family hosted. There I am in 1983, I guess. My family hosted a Japanese student in our home, and then I went on to do my own exchange year in Belgium in a little village called Soigny, which is south of Brussels. And it was an eye-opening experience. It was the first time I'd been on an airplane, and it was a astounding experience. Really opened my eyes. I remember the one story I remember is that I went to school there, a boys' school in the village, and they were starting to teach about World War II in the history class. And my French got pretty good, so I was following along pretty well. And they started talking about World War II, and they were not talking about Patton or Eisenhower. They were talking about this little island in Belgium that never surrendered, apparently, and the Nazis never bothered to overrun it because it was an island off the coast of Belgium, and that was their understanding of what was important in World War II. And that to me opened my eyes that, even, and this is as whatever I was, 19 years old, like every country has their own history. That suddenly dawned on me, like everybody has their own view of the world as well. And that's a lesson I think that's been carried forward with me in diplomacy, because the open secret in foreign affairs is that countries do what's in their best interest, not what you necessarily want. And you have to find out, or you have to find a way to make what you want in their best interest so that they'll do it. So I hope
Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for coming out tonight. Reminder, April 14th will be our next program, and it's one not to miss with the reports from the Regional Security Studies and Dr. Josh Goodman bringing his perspective on Iran and the war that we have with Iran right now. So please join us again. Be safe. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I've got something.
Tell Francis.